The war was lost. Until a human farmer showed up with a wrench, the war had already been lost, or at least that's what everyone on Targos 7 believed. The once proud planets of the galaxy were now shadows of their former selves. Cities lay in ruins, fleets were destroyed, and the flags of resistance had been replaced by Zythurian symbols, gleaming with a cold, mechanical perfection. The few who remained fighting were tired, hungry, and ready to give up. They had been told that no one could stand against the Zythurians. Their weapons were old, their numbers small, and their spirits almost completely broken. Commander Lyran, the leader of the resistance on this desert planet, walked through the command center, his antennae twitching with anxiety. He had seen too many battles lost, too many friends die, and too many planets fall to the unstoppable enemy. Every report that came in from the scanners was worse than the last. The room smelled of dust, sweat, and fear. Soldiers sat at their stations, some with their heads in their hands, others staring blankly at the flickering screens. The main communications console had been broken for weeks, leaving them isolated from the rest of the galaxy. The only voices they could hear were the voices of their own doubts and the warning alarms that blared whenever a Zythurian ship was detected near the planet. Lyran stopped in front of the large viewing window, looking out at the barren, red landscape of Targos 7. Wind whipped up clouds of dust and sand, making the world look even more empty than it already was. In the distance, the jagged mountains rose like dark teeth against the horizon. It was a beautiful place once, he remembered, with green valleys and rivers. Now it was just a battlefield, a place of despair. "Commander," said a young lieutenant nervously. "Sensors are picking up an incoming vessel." Lyran turned sharply, focusing on the readings. The small blip on the scanner was moving slowly, almost lazily, as if it didn't belong in a world at war. He frowned. The Zythurian ships were sleek, fast, and deadly. This was nothing like that. When the ship finally entered the atmosphere, it looked even stranger. It was small and rusty, with scratches along its hull and patches of mismatched metal. It didn't hum with the quiet energy of advanced technology. It creaked and rattled like an old farm vehicle. The soldiers stared in disbelief. "What is that?" one whispered. "A drone?" The ship landed with a soft thud in the open field near the outpost. A hatch opened slowly and a figure stepped out. He was a human, dressed in simple, dusty clothing, holding nothing but a wrench and a backpack. He didn't have armor, weapons, or gadgets. He didn't even look like he was prepared for battle. Yet he walked with a confidence that caught everyone's attention. Lyran felt a strange mix of amusement and frustration. "A human farmer," he muttered. "Here of all places." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Humans were not known for military skill or technical genius. They were known for hard work, stubbornness, and a strange ability to survive in harsh conditions. That was it. Lyran almost laughed at the absurdity, but the human kept walking straight toward the main generator facility without hesitation. The soldiers were too shocked to stop him. Jeb Carter, as he would later introduce himself, didn't speak much. He knelt beside a broken conduit, examining it with careful eyes. He muttered words under his breath, pulling and twisting wires, checking bolts, and turning knobs with his wrench. Every movement seemed deliberate, precise, and oddly confident. Lyran and the others watched in silence, not understanding what he was doing but sensing that it mattered. Hours passed, and the sun began to sink into the horizon. Jeb didn't stop. He climbed onto the roof of the generator, crawling over the metal panels as if they were nothing. He patched leaks, tightened loose connections, and rigged an improvised system to redistribute power. He even fashioned a simple energy pulse device from old components he found lying around, connecting it to the defensive turrets. The soldiers whispered among themselves. "Is he an engineer?" one asked. "No, he's a farmer," another replied. "And yet look at what he's doing." Commander Lyran could not deny what he was seeing. The main generator, which had been on the verge of total failure, hummed with new life. The turrets moved freely, sensors were online again, and the communications panel blinked to life. Jeb finally stood up, dusting off his hands, and looked around. "That should do it," he said simply. No one had asked for his help. No one had even thought to hope that help would come. Yet here he was, a human farmer, turning a hopeless situation into something workable. The first Zythurian scout appeared in the sky that night. It glided silently, its dark hull reflecting the light of Targos' 7 twin moons. The resistance soldiers tensed, ready to fire. But the scout didn't last long. The energy pulse device that Jeb had rigged surged to life, zapping the scout's engines and sending it crashing to the desert floor in a shower of sparks. The soldiers erupted into cheers, amazed that a single human could do what months of planning had not. Lyron shook his head in disbelief. "It's impossible," he said. "How does he do it?" Jeb only smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't need the most advanced tools, you just need to know how things fit together, and you need to be willing to act." Over the next few days, Jeb moved through the outpost like a whirlwind. He repaired old ships, reinforced walls with scavenged materials, and taught the soldiers how to improvise defenses. He didn't lecture or give long speeches. He just worked, showing the soldiers what could be done if they used their minds, their hands, and their courage. Slowly, the mood of the outpost changed. Where there had been despair, there was now a spark of hope. Where there had been fear, there was now determination. Then came the first major attack. A small fleet of Zythurian fighters descended from the sky, expecting an easy victory. The resistance forces, led by Jeb's ingenuity, were ready. Turrets that had been broken for weeks fired with precision. Makeshift mines hidden in the desert exploded beneath the advancing ships. Energy pulses disabled engines, and modified weapons did more damage than anyone had thought possible. The aliens, who had assumed humans were weak and predictable, were caught off guard. Commander Lyron watched in amazement as his soldiers fought with renewed vigor. It was as if Jeb's presence had reminded them of something they had long forgotten. They could make a difference, even in the face of overwhelming odds. One by one, the Zythurian ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. The battlefield, once a place of certain death, became a place of hope and strategy. When the battle ended, the human farmer walked among the soldiers, checking equipment, adjusting wires, and fixing damaged weapons. He never seemed tired. He never complained. He just worked with the quiet determination of someone who had spent his life solving problems, no matter how difficult or unlikely. That night, as the desert wind howled outside the outpost, the soldiers gathered around a small fire. They talked about the battle, about the impossible things they had just witnessed. Commander Lyron stood among them, still in disbelief. "We were going to lose," he said. "Every report said we were finished. But today a human showed us that the impossible is not impossible. That one person with courage and skill can change everything." Jeb sat nearby, wrench resting on his shoulder. He didn't respond. He just looked at the stars, quiet and thoughtful. To him, it was just another problem to solve, another task to complete. But to the soldiers of Targo 7, he had become a symbol of hope, of humanity's ability to endure, adapt, and overcome. Over the following days, reports came in from nearby planets. Rumors spread of the human farmer who had turned the tide of battle on a lost world. Aliens whispered about his strange methods, his fearless determination, and his uncanny ability to make simple tools work wonders. Humans, who had long been dismissed as weak and primitive, were suddenly seen in a new light. They were clever, resourceful, and capable of facing impossible odds with nothing but courage and ingenuity. Jeb didn't care about fame or recognition. He continued to work, moving from one problem to the next, teaching the soldiers how to think differently, how to see solutions where others saw only failure. He repaired ships, built defenses, and even modified weapons in ways no one had thought possible. He became the center of the resistance effort, not through authority or command, but through action, skill, and quiet leadership. By the end of the first week, the outpost was stronger than it had ever been. The generators hummed with steady energy, the turrets were operational, and the soldiers moved with confidence. The despair that had hung over Targo 7 like a dark cloud had lifted, replaced by hope, determination, and the unshakable belief that they could win. Commander Lyron finally approached Jeb one evening as the sun set behind the jagged mountains. "I don't know how you do it," he said, "but you've changed everything here. The soldiers believe again. We can fight back. Maybe we can even win." Jeb smiled faintly. "You already have everything you need," he said. "You just needed someone to remind you. Now it's up to you to keep it going." He picked up his wrench, gave the generator a final check, and walked toward the next challenge waiting somewhere in the outpost. And so, in a galaxy that had already given up hope, a single human with a wrench became the unexpected spark of resistance. The war had seemed lost, but now, for the first time in decades, there was a chance. A chance not because of advanced weapons or vast fleets, but because of courage, ingenuity, and the stubborn determination of one human who refused to see the impossible as permanent. The stars above Targo's 7 burned quietly that night, unaware of the small figure moving through the outpost below. But those who fought on the planet would never forget it. They had witnessed the beginning of a legend, a story that would spread across the galaxy, inspiring hope where there had been none. The war might have been lost before, but as long as humans like Jeb Carter existed, it was not over yet. And somewhere in the distance, a Zythurian scout watched the planet, puzzled and wary. Something had changed. Something about these humans was different. They were dangerous, unpredictable, and perhaps the galaxy had underestimated them entirely. On Targo's 7, the human farmer didn't notice. He was already moving on to the next problem, the next machine, the next opportunity to help. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, the defenders of the planet believed they had a chance. The legend of the human with a wrench had begun. The morning after the first battle was quiet, almost eerily so. The wind swept across the barren landscape of Targo's 7, carrying dust and the faint scent of scorched metal from the destroyed Zythurian scout. The resistance outpost was still alive, buzzing with activity, but the soldiers moved differently now. They walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and looked at one another with a spark of hope in their eyes. The impossible had happened. A human had arrived and changed the course of events in a matter of hours. Jeb Carter didn't notice the change. He was busy at the repair bay, crouched under a damaged shuttle, his wrench in hand. The shuttle had been barely functional before the battle, but now it was alive again, its engines humming softly as if grateful to be in working order. Jeb wiped sweat from his brow and checked the stabilizer circuits. Every connection had to be perfect, and even a minor error could mean disaster during the next attack. Commander Lyron approached him cautiously, still unsure how to address someone who had done what Jeb had done. "How do you know what to do?" he asked quietly. "You aren't a soldier, you aren't an engineer in the traditional sense, yet you've rebuilt our defenses, repaired our ships, and helped win a battle that should have been lost." Jeb shrugged without looking up. "I fix things, machines, equipment, people sometimes. I look at what's broken, figure out how it fits, and make it work. Simple as that." Lyron frowned. "Simple? Nothing here is simple. The Zythurians are relentless, their technology is beyond anything we have, and they will return in greater numbers." Jeb finally looked up, his blue eyes steady and calm. "Then we prepare. That's all we can do. Don't fight them the way they fight. Fight them the way you think, the way you can. Use what you have, not what you wish you had." Lyron watched him for a moment, the words sinking in. It was not just a philosophy, it was a strategy. Jeb had no fancy weapons, no battle training beyond basic survival, yet he had changed the course of a fight that many had thought unwinnable. Maybe that was the human way, Lyron realized, unexpected, unconventional, and relentlessly persistent. The next few days passed in a blur of work and preparation. Jeb moved through the outpost like a force of nature, repairing broken machinery, improvising new defenses, and teaching the soldiers to think creatively. He turned a pile of scrap metal into a makeshift barricade that could stop a small Zythurian tank. He modified old energy turrets to fire in patterns the aliens could not predict. He even repurposed farming tools into weapons that worked better than the soldiers expected. At first, the soldiers were skeptical. Many had been fighting for years, trained in strict protocols and confident in their own knowledge. But as they watched Jeb work, they realized he was not just lucky. He understood things differently. He approached problems with practicality and logic, not fear or tradition. And he worked tirelessly, never complaining, never doubting himself. One afternoon, as the twin suns of Targo's 7 sank low on the horizon, the alarm blared. Another Zythurian fleet was approaching, larger than the first. The soldiers scrambled, checking weapons, manning turrets, and taking positions. Lyron stood on the observation deck, feeling the familiar tension in his chest. He had faced impossible odds before and often failed. But now, with Jeb among them, there was a strange, quiet confidence in the air. Jeb walked among the soldiers, checking equipment, adjusting circuits, and offering quick instructions. "Turret 3, adjust the elevation to 10 degrees higher. Pulse generator is offline, use the backup conduit. Mines in Canyon 5 are armed, but move the trip wires a meter to the left." His directions were simple, precise, and effective. The soldiers followed him without hesitation. When the Zythurian fleet arrived, it was as imposing as ever. Sleek black ships moved in formation, engines glowing with deadly energy. Lyran felt a flicker of fear, but then he remembered Jeb's words, "Fight the way you can. Do not try to be them." The battle began with a deafening roar. Turrets fired, energy beams lit up the desert sky, and mines exploded with shocking force. The Zythurian ships, expecting an easy strike, found themselves caught in traps they could not anticipate. One fighter crashed into a canyon after a tripwire detonated a hidden pulse device. Another was disabled midair by a makeshift energy net that Jeb had rigged from old wiring. Soldiers shouted with excitement, amazement, and relief. The impossible was happening again. Jeb moved through the chaos with calm precision, fixing broken equipment, rearming turrets, and giving soldiers advice in short, clear instructions. He never fought directly. He did not need to. His influence on the battle was far more powerful than any weapon he could hold. By midday, the tide had turned. The Zythurians, who had expected an easy victory, were being forced to retreat. Ships that had seemed unstoppable moments ago were now disabled or destroyed. The soldiers of Targos 7 were no longer fighting for survival, they were fighting for victory. After the battle, Lyran called a meeting with his officers. "We need to understand what is happening here," he said. "This human, he has done what no one else could. Our defenses are stronger, our soldiers are more confident, and the Zythurians are retreating. How?" Jeb stood quietly in the corner, listening. When Lyran finally turned to him, he said simply, "I didn't do it alone. I just showed you how to see the possibilities. You all did the work. You adapted, you fought, you survived. That's what humans do. We solve problems. We don't always have the tools, but we make them work. And we don't give up even when everyone else has." The officers exchanged glances. They had seen bravery before, skill before, but never anything like this. Jeb's presence had done more than repair machinery. It had changed their mindset. Where there had been despair, there was now hope. Where there had been doubt, there was determination. Word of the humans' feats spread quickly. Nearby resistance cells reached out to Targos 7, eager for guidance and advice. Jeb worked tirelessly, moving from one group to another, teaching them how to improvise, repair, and fight differently. He never asked for credit, never demanded recognition. He simply shared his knowledge and allowed the soldiers to see the possibilities within themselves. The Zythurians, however, did not take the human lightly for long. Reports of his actions began to reach their command centers. At first, they laughed. A single human farmer could not possibly change the outcome of a galactic war. Yet as more attacks failed and more fleets were destroyed, they began to take notice. Strategy meetings were held, plans were adjusted, and spies were sent to understand how one human could be so effective. Jeb did not change his methods. He continued to move through the outpost with quiet determination, fixing, teaching, and preparing. He repaired generators, reinforced walls, and built weapons from scavenged parts. He even began to modify the old shuttlecraft into faster, more agile ships that could surprise the enemy. Soldiers learned quickly from his example. They no longer relied on conventional methods alone. They began to think, improvise, and act with courage. One day, a young soldier named Tira approached him. "I don't understand," she said, "how you can fix things so quickly, how you always know what to do." Jeb smiled faintly. "It's not about knowing everything. It's about noticing what is broken, figuring out how it fits, and trying. If it doesn't work, you adjust and try again. Fear will slow you down. Doubt will stop you. Keep moving and you'll find a way." That afternoon, the soldiers practiced under Jeb's guidance. They rerouted energy lines, built makeshift shields, and set traps in the desert that would confuse and damage the next Zythurian attack. The drills were exhausting, but there was laughter and determination as well. For the first time in months, the resistance felt like a united force, capable of standing against a superior enemy. The following week, the Zythurians returned. Their fleet was larger, their strategy more precise. They expected a quick victory just as they had done before. But Targos 7 was ready. The mines, traps, and modified weapons that Jeb had helped prepare functioned perfectly. Turrets fired with unexpected accuracy, and the soldiers fought with courage born of belief in their own abilities. Jeb moved among them quietly, helping where he could, guiding where necessary. He did not lead with authority, he led by example. When a turret jammed, he fixed it in seconds. When a trap failed to trigger, he adjusted it instantly. The Zythurians, confused and frustrated, found themselves facing a resistance that was unpredictable and clever. By the end of the battle, the Zythurians had lost more ships than they had expected. The resistance celebrated quietly. Their victory was small but meaningful. Commander Lyron stood with Jeb, watching the horizon. "I don't know how you do it," he said again, "but you've given us something no weapon ever could. You've given us hope." Jeb nodded, looking out at the desert. "Hope is not given, it's earned, and you earned it today." The human farmer had done more than repair machines or build defenses. He had taught a weary, beaten army that intelligence, courage, and determination could overcome even the most advanced enemy. The legend of the human with a wrench began to grow, quietly but steadily, across Targo's 7. Soldiers spoke of him with awe. Resistance cells sent messages asking for his guidance. And somewhere in the Zythurian fleets, fear and confusion began to take root. Jeb did not seek glory. He simply worked, always moving forward, always finding solutions. To him, it was simple: fix what is broken, help those who can fight, and never give up. But to the galaxy, he had become something extraordinary. He was proof that one human could make a difference, even when the war seemed lost. As night fell on Targo's 7, the stars shone brightly over the desert plains. The human with a wrench worked late into the night, repairing, adjusting, and preparing for whatever would come next. The soldiers around him slept fitfully, dreaming of victory, inspired by the determination of someone who had no reason to be a hero but chose to be one anyway. The war had seemed hopeless, but now, thanks to one human, there was a chance. And that chance would grow, fueled by ingenuity, courage, and the stubborn determination of a species that refused to be defeated. The story of Jeb Carter was only beginning. Days passed after the second battle, and the quiet deserts of Targo's 7 were no longer silent. The sound of machinery hummed constantly from the resistance outpost, a steady reminder that preparation never stopped. Soldiers moved purposefully across the compound, carrying supplies, repairing defenses, and following instructions that were often unconventional, yet effective. The presence of Jeb Carter, the human farmer with the wrench, had transformed not only the machinery but the minds of those who fought there. Jeb never stopped moving. Every corner of the outpost had his touch. Broken energy shields had been repaired, turrets that had not fired for months now spun smoothly, and old, forgotten supply drones were patched together into functioning units. The soldiers no longer saw the human as an outsider or a mere mechanic. He had become a symbol of hope, a figure who represented the possibility of success against an enemy that had seemed unbeatable. One morning, as twin suns rose over the horizon, Jeb walked along the perimeter of the outpost with a small team of soldiers. They carried parts, tools, and makeshift weapons. Jeb's eyes scanned the landscape constantly, noting the uneven terrain, loose rocks, and potential spots for ambushes. "Use the land to your advantage," he instructed. "The Zythurians will rely on their technology and speed. They won't expect the terrain to fight back." The soldiers nodded, taking notes and asking questions. Tira, the young soldier who had first asked Jeb about his knowledge, followed closely. "But won't they just fly over the canyons?" she asked. Jeb smiled faintly. "They can try, but nothing they do is perfect. They rely on predictability. We will make them unpredictable. Canyons, hidden traps, diverted energy pulses, they won't see us coming. They'll underestimate what we can do." Meanwhile, the Zythurians were indeed planning. Their commanders reviewed the recent battles with disbelief. Small resistance forces on Targo's 7 had inflicted serious damage on their fleet, something they considered impossible. They could not understand how a few humans and a handful of allies were managing to frustrate them so consistently. Some suggested new weapons, others suggested retreat, but one thing was clear: this human had to be stopped. Jeb, of course, had no idea of their deliberations. His focus remained entirely on the task at hand. He moved from one section of the outpost to another, fixing generators, modifying weapons, and instructing soldiers. Every task was approached with the same logic: find what is broken, make it work, and ensure it survives the next test. The next Zythurian attack came without warning. Scouts approached silently, flying low over the desert plains. The resistance soldiers, now confident in their abilities, waited with anticipation rather than fear. When the enemy appeared, Jeb gave a single command: activate the canyon's traps, mines, pulse nets, turrets, all of it. It happened exactly as he predicted. Zythurian ships that expected a clear flight path were suddenly caught in a web of ingenuity. Mines exploded in precise timing, energy nets tangled engines, and modified turrets fired in patterns designed to confuse. Several ships crashed into canyon walls, others were forced to retreat midair, and the remaining fighters were damaged enough to flee back to orbit. After the battle, the soldiers erupted into cheers, their morale stronger than ever. Commander Lyran looked at Jeb with awe. "I've seen many heroes," he said, "but none like you. You didn't just win battles, you taught our people to think, to act, to survive. You've done what no military leader could." Jeb shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. Every soldier here did their part. I just showed them how to see the possibilities. Everyone can do more than they think if they are willing to try." News of these victories began spreading to nearby planets. Resistance groups that had been hiding, desperate and afraid, started reaching out to Targo's 7 for guidance. Jeb began coordinating with them, sharing strategies, sending instructions, and even traveling to different outposts to assist in person. His simple, practical approach inspired humans and aliens alike. He showed that a small force could make a huge difference when it relied on intelligence, creativity, and courage instead of sheer numbers. One day, a desperate resistance leader from a neighboring planet arrived at Targo's 7. She had lost most of her forces and feared that her people would be wiped out entirely. "We can't hold them," she said, her voice trembling. "The Zythurians have more ships, better weapons, and endless resources. We are finished." Jeb studied her quietly. Then he said, "You are not finished. You just need to fight differently. Use the environment, use what you have, and don't try to copy them. Think like them, yes, but act like yourselves. You'll surprise them every time." She hesitated, doubt lingering in her eyes. "But they're so strong." "They are," Jeb admitted. "But strength isn't everything. Strategy, cleverness, and courage can beat strength if you use it well. Trust your instincts. Trust your people. You can do this." Inspired by his words, she left Targo's 7 with a renewed plan. Jeb watched her go, confident she would survive and perhaps even succeed. His influence extended beyond the borders of his immediate battle, and the seeds of human ingenuity were spreading across the galaxy. Meanwhile, the Zythurians escalated their attacks. They sent larger fleets, more advanced ships, and even some of their elite commanders to ensure victory. They assumed humans were weak, predictable, and easy to destroy. That assumption was proving to be fatal. Jeb had taught the resistance forces to be unpredictable, to adapt, and to fight in ways the Zythurians could not anticipate. One evening, as the sun set over Targo's 7, Jeb gathered a group of soldiers for training. They were tired, covered in dust, and some had injuries from the latest skirmishes, but Jeb didn't slow down. He demonstrated how to repair a turret mid-battle, how to use scrap materials to build a makeshift barricade, and how to reroute energy lines when the main generators failed. "Remember," he said, "you will never have everything you need. You will have damaged equipment, broken weapons, and limited supplies. That is why you must improvise, think, act, and adapt. If you can do that, nothing can stop you." The soldiers watched, listened, and practiced. They learned faster than Jeb expected, absorbing not just his knowledge but his mindset. They began to anticipate problems, solve them creatively, and fight with confidence. Where fear had once ruled, courage now took its place. During the next attack, the Zythurians were met with the full force of this transformed resistance. Ships that had previously overwhelmed the defenders were now being repelled with clever traps, improvised weapons, and coordinated strikes. Jeb moved among the soldiers, checking equipment, adjusting pulse generators, and offering quick advice. His calm presence inspired confidence in everyone around him. By the time the battle ended, the Zythurians had suffered significant losses. Ships were destroyed, morale was shaken, and their commanders began questioning their own strategies. They could not understand how a small, scattered resistance could inflict such damage. All they knew was that one human, with nothing but a wrench and relentless determination, had changed the course of events on a planet they expected to conquer easily. Afterward, Commander Lyran gathered the soldiers. "Look at what you have accomplished," he said. "You fought, adapted, and survived. You are no longer a beaten force. You are a resistance capable of facing any challenge, and none of this would have happened without Jeb Carter." Jeb shook his head. "Don't thank me. I only showed you the way. You all did this yourselves." Strength, courage, and creativity, you have it all. That is what matters. Keep moving forward. As night fell, Jeb walked alone to the edge of the outpost, gazing at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Zythurians were regrouping, planning their next attack. He did not worry. He knew that the resistance had changed, that humans and their allies were learning to fight in ways the enemy could not predict. He had started something far larger than himself, a spark that would grow into a flame capable of challenging even the most powerful forces in the galaxy. From that moment on, Targos 7 was no longer just a desert planet on the edge of the galaxy. It became a beacon of hope, a place where determination, ingenuity, and human courage had shown that even the impossible could be achieved. Messages of inspiration began to flow from planet to planet, encouraging other resistance cells to act boldly and creatively. Jeb did not seek recognition, glory, or reward. He simply continued to move through the outpost, fixing, teaching, and inspiring. His simple tools, his practical mind, and his unshakable confidence had created a ripple effect that would spread far beyond the deserts of Targos 7. By the end of the week, more resistance leaders arrived, eager to learn from the human who had changed everything. They trained, shared ideas, and implemented strategies inspired by Jeb's methods. They began to win small victories across the neighboring systems, and the Zythurians were forced to respond with even more force. But no matter what the enemy did, the humans and their allies adapted, just as Jeb had taught them. Targos 7 had become the center of a growing movement. It was a place where humans, with nothing more than courage, intelligence, and a wrench, had reminded the galaxy that hope could survive even in the darkest times. And as long as humans like Jeb Carter existed, the galaxy had a chance, not just to survive, but to fight back and win. The days on Targos 7 grew busier and more intense with every passing hour. Jeb Carter, the human farmer who had become a symbol of hope, moved through the resistance outpost like a whirlwind. He had become more than a mechanic or a problem solver. He was a teacher, a strategist, and a guide. Soldiers no longer relied solely on conventional methods or pre-planned orders. Instead, they watched, learned, and adapted under his quiet direction. The entire outpost had transformed. Where despair had once hung thick in the air, there was now energy, focus, and a sense of purpose. Commander Lyron observed the changes with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The soldiers were more confident, more precise, and more resilient than ever before. The turrets, which had previously malfunctioned constantly, now moved with mechanical precision. The pulse generators hummed steadily, and the mines scattered throughout the desert could be activated remotely, rigged to surprise any approaching enemy. Every soldier had been trained in improvisation and repair, able to adapt in real time to unexpected situations. Jeb never rested. Even when exhausted from long hours of work, he pushed forward. One morning, he gathered a group of soldiers and pointed toward the canyon that ran near the outpost. "This canyon is our greatest advantage," he said. "It is unpredictable, full of twists and cliffs, and it can hide both us and our traps. We will use it to our advantage. The Zythurians expect a flat battlefield. We will give them chaos instead." The soldiers listened carefully, absorbing every detail. Jeb demonstrated how to rig mines along hidden paths, how to create pulse nets to disable ship engines, and how to use improvised barriers to force enemy vehicles into predictable paths. It was complex work, but simple in principle. Observe, adapt, and make the environment your weapon. Meanwhile, the Zythurians were not idle. Reports of repeated failures and unexpected losses had reached their command centers. Fleet commanders who had once dismissed humans as insignificant were now frustrated and confused. They began deploying larger fleets, more powerful ships, and elite commanders who had never failed. Their orders were clear: crush Targos 7 and eliminate the human who had caused so many setbacks. Jeb, however, paid little attention to the enemy's movements beyond what the outpost sensors revealed. His focus remained on preparation, strategy, and teaching. Every soldier in Targos 7 had learned to think, improvise, and act independently, guided by his principles. Each system in the outpost had been tested, repaired, and improved upon multiple times. Even the makeshift weapons had been redesigned to maximize efficiency and unpredictability. The first sign of the Zythurian attack arrived as a faint signal on the scanners. A fleet larger than any seen before approached, moving silently over the desert plains. The soldiers braced themselves, no longer with fear but with determination. They had been trained for this moment, taught by a human whose ingenuity defied expectation. Jeb moved quickly among the soldiers, checking systems and giving concise instructions. Turret 5, recalibrate the energy output. Pulse generators sync to the mines. Tripwires extend by 2 meters. Remember, anticipate their moves, don't react. The canyon will do part of the work for us. The Zythurians arrived in full force, expecting an easy victory. Their ships descended over the canyon, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight. They were prepared for resistance, but nothing could have prepared them for what awaited. Mines hidden along the paths exploded, sending shockwaves that disrupted their formations. Pulse nets tangled engines, forcing ships into collision courses with cliffs and barriers. The turrets, modified and improved under Jeb's guidance, fired in unpredictable sequences that destroyed or disabled several ships. The resistance soldiers fought with precision, confidence, and courage. They had learned to act quickly, think creatively, and adapt to every unexpected situation. Each move was deliberate, each decision supported by training and the knowledge that failure was no longer an option. Jeb moved among them, fixing damaged equipment and offering guidance, his calm presence inspiring confidence. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. The Zythurians, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, attempted to regroup and alter their tactics. But Targo's 7 was ready. The outpost defenses, reinforced and optimized under Jeb's guidance, were flexible and resilient. The canyon had become a weapon, unpredictable and deadly, and every soldier knew exactly how to use it. As night fell, the battle reached a turning point. Several Zythurian ships were disabled or destroyed, their commanders unsure of how to respond. The resistance soldiers, led not by rank but by ingenuity and courage, pressed their advantage. Jeb moved through the chaos, repairing, directing, and motivating, turning every obstacle into an opportunity. By dawn, the Zythurians were in full retreat. They had underestimated the humans and their allies. Targo's 7 had survived, and more than that, it had inflicted significant losses on an enemy that had seemed unbeatable. Soldiers cheered, exhausted but exhilarated. Commander Lyron looked at Jeb, speechless. "I don't know how you do it," he said. "Every time you find a way to turn the impossible into reality, you've done what no one thought possible." Jeb smiled faintly. "You did it, all of you. I only showed you how. Strength, courage, and creativity, those are yours. I just reminded you how to use them." The aftermath of the battle brought both relief and renewed purpose. Resistance groups from nearby planets began contacting Targo's 7, seeking advice and support. Jeb and the commanders coordinated training sessions, shared strategies, and provided resources. Humans and their allies began adopting his methods, modifying them to suit local conditions, and achieving victories of their own. Targo's 7 became a hub of innovation and resistance. Soldiers repaired damaged equipment, built makeshift weapons, and developed strategies that relied on thinking and creativity rather than brute force. The human approach, practical, adaptable, and fearless, spread like wildfire, inspiring hope across the galaxy. Jeb continued his work without pause. He repaired ships, improved defenses, and trained new recruits. Every day, he reminded the soldiers that the greatest weapon was not advanced technology, but ingenuity, courage, and the willingness to act. Every problem could be solved, every challenge could be met, if they were willing to think differently and act decisively. As the weeks passed, the Zythurians realized they had underestimated the humans entirely. They deployed larger fleets and more powerful weapons, expecting to crush the resistance once and for all. But Targo's 7 and its allies were ready. They anticipated attacks, adapted strategies, and used the terrain, traps, and improvised weapons to devastating effect. The humans, guided by Jeb's example, fought in ways the enemy could not predict. One night, Jeb gathered the soldiers on a high cliff overlooking the desert. The stars above shone brightly, and the wind carried the scent of machinery, dust, and determination. "Remember," he said, "every battle is won before it begins. Preparation, observation, and action, those are your tools. Use them wisely. The enemy may be strong, but they are predictable. We are not." The soldiers listened intently, absorbing his words. They had seen him in action countless times, yet each lesson felt new, urgent, and vital. They had learned to trust their instincts, improvise, and act with courage. The fear that had once paralyzed them was gone, replaced by confidence and determination. The next Zythurian assault came at dawn. Their fleet was larger than ever, their weapons more advanced, and their commanders determined to succeed. But the resistance was ready. Mines, pulse nets, improvised turrets, and the unpredictable terrain of the canyon combined to create a battlefield the Zythurians could not control. Ships were disabled, formations were broken, and the attackers were forced into retreat. Jeb moved among the soldiers, adjusting systems, repairing equipment, and providing guidance. His calm presence, practical knowledge, and unwavering determination inspired everyone around him. Every obstacle was met with a solution, every challenge with action. The human farmer had become the heart of the resistance, the spark that ignited courage, ingenuity, and hope across the outpost. By the end of the battle, the Zythurians had suffered their heaviest losses yet. Targo 7 had survived, and its soldiers had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable. The legend of Jeb Carter, the human with a wrench, continued to grow. Across the galaxy, humans and their allies were inspired by his example, realizing that determination, creativity, and courage could overcome even the most powerful enemies. Commander Lyran approached Jeb after the battle. "You've done more than anyone could have imagined," he said. "You've not only helped us survive, you've taught us to fight, to think, and to win." Jeb shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. Every soldier here fought with courage. Every person who followed my guidance made a difference. I only showed the way. The victories are yours." As night fell over Targo 7, the outpost buzzed with activity. Soldiers repaired equipment, shared lessons, and prepared for the next challenge. Jeb walked through the compound, quietly observing, fixing, and adjusting. He never sought recognition or praise. He simply continued to work, teaching, guiding, and inspiring those around him. The human farmer with a wrench had become more than a symbol. He had become a force that transformed the very nature of resistance, showing that even in the darkest times, ingenuity, courage, and determination could turn the tide of war. And as the stars above Targo 7 shone quietly, the galaxy began to understand that humans, underestimated and overlooked, were capable of greatness beyond imagination. The desert of Targo 7 was quiet for the first time in weeks. The twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the reinforced walls of the resistance outpost. For many, this stillness was unusual, almost suspicious. But Jeb Carter, the human farmer who had changed the course of the war, moved with calm certainty. He knew the quiet was not an end, only a pause, a moment to prepare for what was coming next. Reports had come in from across nearby systems. Resistance cells, inspired and guided by the methods Jeb had shared, had begun achieving remarkable victories. Small fleets had repelled Zythurian patrols. Isolated colonies had been secured. Supplies were flowing to outposts previously cut off, and morale had reached levels that were almost unthinkable for forces who had once been desperate, beaten, and hopeless. The galaxy was taking notice. Jeb moved through the outpost, checking systems and equipment. Turrets were aligned, pulse nets were fully charged, and mines were strategically hidden across the desert. Each soldier moved with confidence and skill, knowing exactly what to do when the enemy arrived. Jeb did not give orders in a commanding tone. Instead, he taught, demonstrated, and allowed each person to think and act. The soldiers had learned to rely on their own judgment, guided by his principles of ingenuity, observation, and courage. Commander Lyran joined him near the observation deck. "You've done something remarkable, Jeb," he said. "The resistance is no longer scattered or weak. We've become a force that can challenge even the largest Zythurian fleet. But they won't stop. They will return stronger and smarter. Can we hold them?" Jeb looked out across the desert, eyes steady. "We don't just hold them, we change the rules. They think strength and technology are everything. We know it's not. We use what we have, we adapt, and we fight differently. That's how humans win. That's how any underdog wins." The first warning came in the late evening. Sensors detected an enormous Zythurian fleet moving into orbit, their engines glowing like a dark storm on the horizon. It was larger than any previous attack, and intelligence reports suggested elite commanders were present. This was the final push, the decisive strike the Zythurians hoped would crush the resistance once and for all. Jeb walked among the soldiers, calm but focused. "This is what we've trained for. Don't panic. Follow what you've learned. Observe, adapt, and act. We've done this before. We can do it again. Bigger fleet, bigger challenge, same principles. Preparations intensified through the night. Energy barriers were reinforced, turrets were checked and rechecked, and pulse nets were connected to backup generators. Mines were strategically placed across the desert, some in patterns that even the most experienced Zythurian pilots could not predict. Every detail was scrutinized, every possibility considered. As the first Zythurian ships descended into the atmosphere, the resistance was ready. The battle began with a deafening roar. Turrets fired in precise, unpredictable sequences. Mines exploded in perfectly timed patterns, disrupting enemy formations. Pulse nets tangled engines and disabled advanced weapon systems. The Zythurians, expecting a straightforward assault, found themselves trapped in a battlefield they could not control. Jeb moved among the soldiers, making adjustments and repairs on the fly. One turret jammed mid-battle. He fixed it in seconds. A pulse generator overheated. He rerouted the power lines and brought it back online instantly. His calm, methodical approach inspired confidence. Every obstacle became an opportunity, every failure a lesson to adapt and improve. The Zythurian commanders were stunned. They had underestimated the humans completely. Time and again, their ships were disabled or destroyed in ways they could not anticipate. Their elite fighters were caught in traps, forced to retreat, or eliminated by precision attacks from the resistance. For the first time in the war, the Zythurians were on the defensive. Soldiers moved with purpose, acting independently but in perfect coordination. Jeb had taught them to think creatively, to improvise, and to trust their own judgment. They no longer feared the enemy. They understood that clever strategy and bold action could overcome even superior strength. Hours into the battle, the Zythurians attempted to regroup. Larger ships moved into formation, trying to overwhelm the resistance. But Jeb had anticipated this. He activated a network of traps and improvised defenses that forced the fleet into narrow passages, where mines, pulse nets, and turrets could strike with devastating effect. Ships collided, engines failed, and the Zythurians were thrown into chaos. Commander Lyran looked over the battlefield in amazement. "We've never seen anything like this," he said. "They can't understand how we're doing it. Every move we make seems impossible to predict." Jeb nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "That's the point. Don't fight like them. Fight like yourself. Every small advantage, every clever move counts. We're not just surviving, we're winning." As the battle wore on, the Zythurian fleet began to retreat. Losses were severe, morale was shattered, and their commanders faced a choice: continue the attack and risk annihilation, or retreat and regroup. The humans had turned the tables completely. By the end of the day, the battlefield was quiet again. The resistance soldiers, though exhausted, were elated. They had achieved what many thought impossible. They had defeated a superior force, protected their home, and demonstrated that determination, ingenuity, and courage could overcome even the most powerful enemy. Jeb moved through the outpost, checking on soldiers, repairing equipment, and quietly ensuring everything was ready for the next challenge. Despite the victory, he remained focused. "Celebrate, yes," he told them, "but stay ready. The galaxy doesn't wait for anyone. Keep learning, keep improving, keep fighting." In the days that followed, word of Targo's 7 victory spread across the galaxy. Resistance groups everywhere adopted the strategies Jeb had taught, and small victories began multiplying. The Zythurians, once confident of conquest, now faced a galaxy filled with resistance they could not predict or control. Humans, with their ingenuity and courage, had become the spark that ignited hope across countless planets. Jeb continued to travel between outposts, teaching, repairing, and inspiring. He never sought recognition or praise. His satisfaction came from seeing others succeed, from watching soldiers grow confident, and from knowing that the galaxy now had a fighting chance. One morning, as he stood on a cliff overlooking the desert, Commander Lyran approached him. "Jeb," he said, "you've done more than anyone could have imagined. You've changed the course of this war. Entire fleets have been destroyed, planets saved, and hope restored." How did a human farmer do all this?" Jeb looked out over the desert, wrench in hand, eyes calm and steady. "I didn't do it alone. Everyone here did their part. Every soldier, every leader, every person willing to think, act, and adapt made this possible. I just showed what could be done. Humans, we just don't give up. We find a way, no matter how impossible it seems." Lyran nodded, understanding fully for the first time. Humans were not the strongest in terms of technology or weapons, but their creativity, courage, and determination made them unstoppable. One human could change the outcome of a battle. Many could change the fate of a galaxy. Months passed. The resistance, guided by Jeb and inspired by his methods, grew stronger. The Zythurians were pushed back from multiple systems, their supply lines disrupted, and their confidence shattered. Planets that had once feared extinction now flourished under the protection of human-led resistance cells. And everywhere, the story of the human farmer with a wrench spread like wildfire, a symbol of ingenuity, courage, and hope. One evening, as Jeb repaired a damaged supply shuttle, a young soldier approached him. "Will it ever end?" she asked. "The war, I mean, will we ever truly be free?" Jeb paused, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the stars above, considering the vastness of the galaxy and the challenges still ahead. "The war may never truly end," he said. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is that we keep fighting, keep learning, and keep protecting what's important. Every victory, no matter how small, is a step forward, and every human willing to act makes a difference." The soldier nodded, inspired. She understood now what Jeb had always shown. Strength was not just in weapons or numbers, but in determination, intelligence, and the courage to act when it mattered most. As the suns rose over Targo 7, Jeb stood on the observation deck, looking out over the desert. The outpost was alive with activity, soldiers preparing for future challenges, repairing equipment, and continuing to learn. The galaxy had changed. The war was far from over, but humans had proven that they could face any odds, adapt, and prevail. The Zythurians would return, undoubtedly. They would bring more ships, more weapons, and more strategies. But the humans, guided by courage, ingenuity, and determination, would be ready. One human farmer with a wrench had shown the way. Many humans would follow. And together they would change the fate of the galaxy. Jeb turned back to his work, adjusting circuits, tightening bolts, and preparing defenses. He did not need glory or praise. He needed only to act, to teach, and to inspire. Because he knew that in the vastness of space, hope was the greatest weapon of all. And humans, no matter how ordinary they seemed, could wield it better than anyone else. And so, the legend of the human farmer grew. A story of courage, ingenuity, and the relentless determination of a species that refused to be defeated. The war had seemed lost, but one human had shown the galaxy that even the smallest spark could ignite a fire that would change everything.